Good evening. I wanted to talk on an aspect of the presidency of the United States that not very many people are aware of. That aspect is the United States presidential line of succession. To put that into a simple question, who are all the people or who can become the president should the necessity arise? It is easy to assume that should the president die, resign from office, or is unable to discharge his official duties, then the vice president becomes the president. The first three people behind the president who can become the president are, in succession, number one, it is the vice president of the United States. Number two, it is the Speaker of the House of Representatives. And number three is the president of the Senate. But what if some disaster or some catastrophic event occur and all of these four men are either killed or incapable of carrying out their duties in office? Who in government can become the president? Or who are all the people that are in this line of succession? Before I read the list of people or the list of cabinet members who are in the line of succession to the presidency of the United States, I wanted to read to you what the Constitution of the United States reads or states with regard to the line of succession. Article 2, Section 1, Clause 6 of the Constitution of the United States states, in case of the removal of the President from office, or of his death, resignation, or inability to discharge the powers and duties of the said office, the same shall devolve on the Vice President, and the Congress may, by law, provide for the case of removal, death, resignation, or inability both of the President and Vice President, declaring what officer shall then act as President, and such officer shall act accordingly until the disability be removed or a President shall be elected. In the case that the President can no longer serve, the Vice President would serve as President. If the Vice President cannot serve, the line of succession falls to the Speaker of the House, then to the President of the Senate, then to the cabinet members. Before I read to you the list of all the cabinet members, I wanted to share with you other information, other pertinent and important information about this law and dates in history that where this law has actually taken place. And I read, the 25th Amendment allows the Vice President to serve as acting President temporarily in the case that the President is ill or otherwise temporarily unable to fulfill his or her official duties. It must be remembered that in the 13th of July 1985, Vice President George H. Bush served as President of the United States for 8 hours while President Ronald Reagan had surgery. 8 vice presidents have assumed the presidency upon the death of the president, one upon the president's resignation. The president pro tempore serves as leader of the Senate in the vice president's absence and is usually the senior member of the majority party. The 20th Amendment provides that the vice president-elect becomes president if the president-elect dies before his term starts, but after the electorate is met. So what that means is, if a president has been voted in by the people and has won the general election, but before he could get inaugurated, he dies, or something happens to him, then the vice president elect becomes the president. No cabinet member may become president unless he or she is over 35 years old and is a United States citizen. Now let's go back in history on different dates in history and what happened on these dates or years as it pertains to this law. In 1792, the Presidential Succession Act passes, making the Senate President next in line after the Vice President to succeed the President. In 1886, Congress changes the law to put cabinet officers next in line after the vice president. Proponents of the act thought that cabinet officers had better experience to serve as president. 1947, President Harry S. Truman signs the Presidential Succession Act of 1947, changing the line of succession to Vice President, then Speaker of the House, then Senate President. In 2003, legislation is introduced in the House to reform the line of succession and move the Secretary of Homeland Security from last to eighth behind the Attorney General. In 2004, testimony before House Judiciary Committee by Representative Brett Sherman of California explores reforming the presidential line of succession by removing both the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate and expanding the list to include the ambassadors to the United Nations and those ambassadors to the four permanent member nations of the United Nations Security Council. March 9, 2006, the United States Patriot Improvement and Reauthorization Act of 2005 is signed into law, adding the Secretary of Homeland Security to the line of succession. Now, a little bit about the vice presidential succession. Section 2 of the 25th Amendment of the United States Constitution, it reads, "Wherever there is vacancy in the office of the Vice President, the President shall nominate a Vice President who shall take office upon confirmation by a majority vote of both houses of Congress. If the Vice President is unable to serve, the President nominates a replacement, which must be confirmed by Congress. If something happened to the President before a Vice Presidential nominee is confirmed, the line of succession of President would fall to the Speaker of the House. There is no timeline on when the President must nominate a replacement. Before the 25th Amendment, there was no procedure for selecting a replacement for the Vice President. The assassination of President John F. Kennedy spurred the movement for the 25th Amendment. So going back in history, 7 vice presidents have died in office. George Clinton, who served under both Thomas Jefferson and James Madison; Elbridge Gerry, who served under Madison; William R. King, who served under Franklin Pierce; Henry Wilson, who served under Ulysses Grant; Thomas Hendricks, who served under Grover Cleveland; Garrett Hobart, who served under William McKinley; and James Sherman, who served under William Howard Taft. When Harry Truman succeeded Franklin D. Roosevelt as president in 1945, the vice presidential office remained vacant for 4 years. After the assassination of John F. Kennedy, there was no vice president from November 22, 1963 until Hubert Humphrey's inauguration on the 20th of January 1965. On the 6th of July 1965, the 25th Amendment is sent to the states and is ratified on February 10, 1967. In 1973, Gerald Ford becomes the first vice president chosen under the 25th Amendment after Vice President Spiro T. Agnew resigns. In 1974, after Richard Nixon resigns and Ford assumes the presidency, Ford nominates Nelson Rockefeller to be vice president. So we can see that over the years and how the laws have changed and who to include, who not to include has been debated, and different dates in history also showing the different successions or the different vice presidents or presidents that have died or have otherwise resigned, and we've seen changes all throughout history. But here are the list of everybody or everybody in cabinet or in government that can become president should the necessity arise. We know that the first 4 are the President of the United States, Second is the Vice President of the United States. Third is the Speaker of the House of Representatives. And fourth is the President of the Senate. So after after the after those top four, here are the next people who are in line, this line of succession that we're talking about, that can become the President of the United States. So after the fourth one, which is the President of the Senate, here is the next in list, and I'm going to read it in order. So it's the Secretary of Treasury, the Secretary of Defense, the Attorney General, the Secretary of Interior, the Secretary of Agriculture, the Secretary of Commerce, the Secretary of Labor, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, the Secretary of Transportation, Secretary of Energy, Secretary of Education, Secretary of Veterans Affairs, and lastly, the Secretary of Homeland Security. So I think it's important to know this information because I guess it's critical, and so that we understand that our system of government, as it pertains to the office of the President of the United States, that at no time should it be vacant. At no time should the country be without a vice president or without a president. That there'll be somebody in line to assume the office of the president with approval from Congress, so that we can have a head of government. We can have a representative of the state, representative of people at all times and in all places. So for those of you that would want to read more into it or interested in learning more about it, I'm going to post up the links to our websites, and you can have a read and be able to see what the law says exactly. Thank you very much for your time.